I'm joined by Stacey Post, who is the president of the Simpson College Republicans, and Olivia Anderson, president of the Simpson College Democrats. With the Iowa caucuses just a few days away, we're going to discuss each of the candidates and who would be most likely to qualify and get into the nitty-gritty stuff of that. So let's start with the top issues of this election cycle. Everyone knows that it's very contentious, it's very heated. For the Democrats, I'll start with you, Olivia. What do you think are the top issues that people are looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely is a combination of both fiscal and social issues. I'd say probably one of the biggest fiscal issues would be just regarding healthcare. So how are we going to improve upon the current Affordable Care Act that was pretty much instituted by President Obama? Are we going to go with a single-payer system? Are we just going to essentially build upon the ACA? Like, what's the best? And how will that impact families of all income levels? Whereas I think a lot of social issues, we have a lot of police brutality and a lot of just racial tension currently happening in the United States. It's been happening for a long time, but I think that those are two of the pretty biggest issues that are currently facing the Democratic Party.
So switch over to the Republican side then. What are the, top 3 issues then for Republicans?
I would say tax policy is one of the top ones, national security, and then the overall economy, and what part of that the federal government really needs to take action for and against, versus letting business kind of regulate itself. And we've seen that that's good and bad in both ways. So it's definitely a debate to have. And obviously on our side, there's so many different options of where you really want the federal government to be and what part of your life you want the federal government to affect. And I honestly think any of them would be good, including the Democrats. But obviously I'm biased towards the Republicans. But as far as that goes, I think we have a lot of the same issues that are going on. But I would say taxes are definitely big, including like where America falls on the international scale and like our corporate tax rate, and just figuring all of that out to have the best economy.
Mm-hmm. Now, looking at the poll numbers for the Republican side, it looks like there was a trend how outsiders tended to be at the top of the polls. Now, does that have to do anything with that then?
I think that it has to do with the fact that when anyone is elected into the presidency, you tend to drift toward the middle, and so you get people promising to do certain things during the election cycles, and they have no choice but to drift toward the middle once they're actually elected. And a lot of people think that that's a terrible thing. I think it brings people together because the president has to be everyone's president. But as far as that's true, I think you're always going to end up with some people that are upset, but at the end of the day, it's just something that happens.
And I understand that this election, as with a lot of other elections, a key part of this would be wooing independent voters.
Absolutely.
So then with this polarization that's kind of happening, Stacey, how do you think the Republicans will fare in trying to garner more votes from that group?
I think you're going to see a lot of change after the Iowa caucus, because in Iowa you really have to try to get the evangelical vote, and so you're seeing them drift toward being more and more conservative to try to grab that group of voters while they can. And then the later in the cycle, as it goes on to New Hampshire and the other early primary states, you're going to see them going towards the middle more. And you're already seeing that, the difference of when Ted Cruz speaks here versus when Ted Cruz speaks elsewhere is, and a lot of candidates are like that, where they'll really court the conservative Christian kind of group voting block here, and then kind of drift towards the middle in other places to really go for because at the end of the day you really do have to try to get the independent vote, and I think it would be misguided not to.
So then let's get to the nitty-gritty and talk about specifics of each candidate, because not a lot of people might know specifics about each candidate. They may know the gist of it, but let's start with Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton. She's been up in the polls. Recently she's kind of slipped a little, but to say that she's not a contender would be false. So where does she stand? What are her strengths? What are her weaknesses?
I think a lot of people thought that Hillary was a shoo-in from the beginning, but I had the fortunate opportunity to work as a fellow with her campaign this past summer. So I was told by the staff that we have to go out and earn every single vote. We can't go in to the campaign with that mindset. So in terms of her strengths, I think without a doubt her experience not only working with domestic issues whenever she was a member of Congress representing New York, but also whenever she was Secretary of State. That gave her a lot of foreign policy, not only experience, but also respect internationally. That's something we have never seen from any other political candidate for office in terms of that well-rounded support and also just respect. So definitely looking at her kind of background is something that is unparalleled. Also, whenever you just look at her gender, a lot of people I've noticed throughout this entire candidacy have overplayed her gender and also underplayed it. So at the end of the day, it is a valid qualification that makes her unique.
So then the Republicans on the other side will tend to garner towards the negative side of Hillary Clinton,
yes.
namely her emails, her handling of Benghazi. How are they going to approach that?
I think they already have in that the Republicans have already gone for that in the last few months, I think, especially during her congressional hearing for it. But
do you think it's beating a dead horse then?
I don't think so. I think there are at least in some perspectives valid concerns, and I think that there's for such a powerful person to be in that situation. I think that regardless of the fact that there was even a question of whether it was legal or whether she did the right thing.
So then, going back to the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders, he's mentioned in his speeches, no, I came out of nowhere, and now he's a contender for Hillary Clinton.
Absolutely.
How do you think his rise has played into this game changer?
Yeah, and I think Bernie Sanders definitely has based his candidacy on a message that has resonated with a lot of people, not just young people, but just people who are fed up with politics as usual. And he has been in the Senate for many years. Before he became, I guess, a Democrat, he was a socialist, declared socialist. But he has definitely explained his views in terms of democratic socialism, which, believe it or not, we've had presidents before that have implemented democratically socialist ideals, whether that be Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. So it's not like it's this negative, thing in American society, but it's definitely perceived as such.
Martin O'Malley, is he still in the run?
Martin O'Malley, I think, gave it a good run, and I really do applaud him for sticking in this long. Most people at this point, months ago, would have dropped out of the race, but he is a really great candidate. I think he does have a future somewhere in politics, and I think he would do a wonderful job, appointed to some position in a president's cabinet, some other leadership role in our country, or even a presidential run, years down the line. I think that he will do great things, but in this election, I just don't see him winning the nomination.
So then let's switch over and switch gears, and I think it's fair to say that the Republican field is interesting at best.
Yeah, that's a good word for it.
Yeah.
So how do we want to tackle this? Let's start with Donald Trump.
Sure. So I think actually a lot of what Olivia said about Bernie Sanders is applicable to Donald Trump in that he's really tapping into the people who want a revolution and want a difference and don't want politics as usual. And I think that it can be a little bit dangerous, but also, it surely adds a conversation, and it's created a race in which we have to talk about these issues and whether we actually want Washington as usual. And I think there are other candidates who, approach it as, I have experience and it will not be Washington as usual. Like, that's how Governor Bush approaches it, in that, you can be a change maker while also not, making an entire country angry. But as far as that's true, I think he's very similar to Bernie, not in issues, obviously, but just in tapping into people who want something severely different from how it is.
Should Ted Cruz be the nominee? Is that even better? Where does he stand?
I think that Ted Cruz also embodies a lot of the anger from the establishment, and Ted Cruz has a senatorial record of fighting the Republican establishment, and that's created some problems for him recently, obviously, but I think he represents a lot of what Donald Trump is saying, but also with the experience to say, well, not only did I fight the establishment and I have a record of fighting the establishment, but I also know my way around Washington and know, who I should speak to. And I think that in some ways that plays with him and against him because he can't play the outsiders card that's been super popular, like the Ben Carson. But I don't know how it's going to end up, and I don't necessarily know which would be better. I personally think that government experience is an asset and not a liability, but it's not about me, it's about everyone else, and if everyone else decides to make that decision, that's what America's about.
So then some of the independents that I talked to were leaning more Democratic, Olivia, but then they said they might caucus for Marco Rubio. How do you think that would impact this election cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely does. You should take into consideration if they are going to be caucus goers versus just if they support a candidate, because just because someone thinks that a candidate would be good doesn't mean that they're actually going to go out and vote. So I think in terms of a lot of independents, they tend to be independent because they don't feel a certain draw towards a certain party. So typically candidates, they feel more draw towards candidates or certain issues. So I think it would have to be more of an analysis into what those independents really care about in terms of the issues. Are they more focused on social issues? Do they think that certain things within social issues such as maybe abortion or separation of church and state, same-sex marriage, or is that something that they would be more likely to support a candidate based on that candidate's record? Or would they be more likely to support a candidate based on their economic policies such as taxes? How would they essentially treat the tax situation, and also just our debt deficit here in the United States? So most independents tend to be much more issue-based. So, yep.
Were there any other candidates besides Cruz, Trump, Rubio? Is there one that kind of stands out that could make a surprise or make a splash?
I would not be surprised if Ben Carson has been falling a little bit in the polls, and depending on what poll you look at, he can be anywhere from 3rd place to 7th. But because that's just how the polls have been. But I would not be surprised if he was in 3rd or 4th in the caucus for the Republicans, because he represents a lot of what Iowans want, want this cycle, which is an outsider who's obviously Christian based, because that's what a lot of people look for, and he is genuinely a really smart guy. And I met him the other night, and he was so nice, but I wouldn't be surprised if he pulled up in 3rd or 4th.
So can I pick both of your brains?
Sure.
Who's going to win the Democratic nomination?
I think I just looked at a poll that was published by the Des Moines Register, Ann Seltzer, who is a political genius, pollster genius, today, and she showed that Clinton had just a hair of a lead over Sanders. So I think it really will depend on who turns out to vote.
Stacey?
For the Iowa caucus, I would say my personal prediction would be Cruz in 1st, Trump 2nd, Rubio 3rd. And then I have no clue about the nomination. I guess we'll find out more. Yeah, we'll find out more after the New Hampshire results, I think. And I think that'll help, like I said, winnow the field a little bit more. And you'll be able to see who's really serious about wanting to go on and who, is kind of done.
Yeah,
flickering
and it'll
out.
Definitely be interesting to see who wins New Hampshire, since it is so soon. Because, I personally feel that Clinton has a good shot of winning Iowa. So Clinton, Sanders, but then Sanders has a decent shot of winning New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. So if you do have that kind of, 1-1, then what's left? You look at those other states that are more kind of focusing on the general election. So it'll be interesting.
All right. Stacey Post and Olivia Anderson, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks.